Okay, great. So the last lecture, we will talk about cracking the computational modeling with Stan. This is part 2. Part 1 is actually pretty similar to the entire semester, to the entire second half of the semester, to give a introductive overview to the Ritzler-Wagner model. And here is a little bit more practical to basically show you what are the practical steps and also the considerations you will pay attention to when you really analyze the data on yourself. So here there's this is the part 1, and because I gave some part of this talk to a Chinese audience, so here there's some Chinese. All right. Okay. So here we will talk about again the motivations of why we need cognitive models or cognitive modeling, and then I would like to introduce to you a pretty new field, which is called computational psychiatry. Maybe you have heard about that, maybe not, that's okay. And we can talk about that a little bit. And then I will show you the workflow of using Bayesian statistics, in particular with the software called STAN that we have been focusing on. We will cover both the conceptual level and also the practical level, and then the summary. Okay. Here, these slides we have seen before, right? During the beginning of the second half of the semester. So the idea of computational modeling is never new. So this is try to convince you that maybe you think computational modeling is too fancy, is too new to many of you. It is, but actually it's not, because the idea of computational modeling is never new. It has been used really intensively in other fields, maybe physics and also geographical science, geoscience. It's new indeed, but it's new in our field. The idea itself, computational modeling, has been around for quite long. When it is applied to cognition or psychology or cognitive neuroscience, what we want to do, what we want to achieve. So what we want to achieve is to approximate the possible cognitive process underlying some interesting behavior. So if we show participants, if we have a button press example, if we have a button press experiment, 2 options, choose one, see the feedback, and choose again, and make the choice 100 times. This is the output of the participants. And we want to understand why participants are making this kind of choices, why they choose blue over yellow when they learn, or we also are interested in how learning happens, right? How learning emerges. To achieve this goal, we use computational modeling. So here, imagine there's participants sitting in front of a computer, and the participant is generating some readouts that we can measure. So we can measure either behavior, button press, or maybe we can measure something else like the bold brain signals, the EEG or eye tracking. We can measure different things. And we want to understand, we try to understand what's happening in the brain, and we cannot directly see what's inside, because if you do animal research, you can really just look inside the brain and you can have some electrodes to directly record neuron activities. This is rarely possible in humans. So we use this kind of machine to have an indirect measurement. But if we try to understand what's happening in the brain, so we propose a model. So the model is also to try to approximate what might be happening in the brain. So we use the model, and then we have the model fitting, and then we see if the model could more or less resemble the behavior of the participants. Then we say the model is a good approximation to cognition. Okay, so cognitive modeling, good. A few examples of the paper that I wanted to show here is like, so the entire second part of the semester, we focused on a really particular set of models. That is the reinforcement learning model. So why I chose reinforcement learning model over the others, why I didn't tell you some memory models, why I didn't tell you some risky decision-making models, is because the reinforcement learning model and also the corresponding framework is pretty versatile, flexible, and also powerful in neuroscientific research, in psychology, in cognitive neuroscience. So here, these a few papers I show here. They are from like March last year. I showed 4, and 3 of them, they focus on reinforcement learning models. And if you know the journals, they are those pretty good journals, and there's the potential to have have a good paper there. This is something, one side thing is like this. So using computational modeling doesn't really guarantee you to have a good paper, okay? It is pretty powerful, but if you use computational modeling, that doesn't guarantee you to have a good paper. But the other way around is, if there's a good paper, it's very likely that there's some kind of computational modeling in the analysis. You see what I'm trying to say, right? So that basically means it's good, it's helpful for your future career to learn some kind of computational models. All right. Okay. So usually, if I'm presenting if I'm giving the same presentation to a group of people, they do not have quite so much experience in computational modeling, I think most of the cases, they are aware of something is already there. They are aware of computational modeling. They've never done that. Some of the reason is because this is pretty challenging to understand. So here for us, for all of you here, you can understand very well here this graph, right? But if there is a new person, they have never used computational modeling in their research, this is pretty overwhelming to look at. And also something like this in the most of the time in the supplementary information of the paper, there are a lot of equations. This is honestly from my paper, and this is not so straightforward to understand, right? So this is quite challenging. Usually the way to overcome this challenge is to practice on your own, and also to take courses like the TEWA one that we have so far is good. And the best practice is always to apply modeling to your own data. So if you like learning any programming language or anything, any new things, you go to the lecture and then you heard something interesting from the professor or whoever, it's good. And then you read some papers, also interesting. But I think there is always a huge step between knowing something or listening to the lecture and apply or implement the analysis on your own. And only when you implement something on your own, you can really learn it. I guess this is also the purpose of our programming project. So you work on the data and then to implement, to debug, and then you will eventually learn a lot from this process. Okay, good. So another challenge of using computational modeling is that there is so far not yet a well-established workflow. So let me try to explain. So if we have a factorial experimental design, for example, if we have a 2x2 experimental design, so one factor is maybe pre-post. If I do something and 1 week later I do the same thing, pre-post condition. Another factor can be drug versus placebo, right? So then there will be 2x2 factorial design. And if I give you the 2x2 data, you really know how to analyze it. You just basically use a repeated measure ANOVA, and then you tell me the results, the statistics, and then you do some further follow-up analysis if there is an interaction effect, okay? This is usually the case. It's pretty easy to follow, and then this is how that works. Most of the time, good? Yeah, okay, I said that. But this kind of easy to follow workflow or procedure is not yet so well convinced or so well comprehensive to many of the researchers. And then the question here is there any easy to use and reproducible workflow in computational modeling under the Bayesian workflow? So the answer is it is there, but it's not so aware of. Not many people are not so aware of it. Yet. There is a paper from 2019 or maybe 2020, last year or maybe 2 years ago. That's pretty recent. Right? So you see here, many people are trying to popularize or to promote the workflow. It's still in its early stage. So when the paper is out, not so many people are aware of it. It takes some time until everyone are aware of it, and then until everyone could follow and implement everything properly. Okay. So here I'm showing you one version. I guess there are multiple versions. This is a third challenge, honestly. So the challenge here is there is not a unified framework. Maybe I use something, somebody else they use something else. Then does it really make a difference? Maybe not. So there are a lot of degrees of freedom in terms of the analysis. You can do this step, but you can also skip it. And it's a little bit difficult to many people. The difficult is you have to make decisions. Do you want to do it or not? So this is the decision if there are so many degrees of freedom, okay? Let's talk about the version that I'm trying to convey. The computational modeling using the example of computational psychiatry. So what is computational psychiatry? So computational psychiatry is really a new field, so new that many people are not aware of it. And if you really want to know the history of computational psychiatry, it is younger than 10 years. I guess the first computational psychiatry paper came out maybe 2011, 2012, that kind of time. And then after that, there are a few review papers to say this can be promising in the future and to use computational psychiatry as approach to understand diseases, in particular mental diseases. So if you see here, like 2012, and 2016, 19 here, and 2018, every year there's a paper about computational psychiatry. So what is computational psychiatry? So psychiatry is the research field or subject, and they try to understand mental diseases, psychiatrical disorders, for example, schizophrenia and autism spectrum disorder, mood disorder, depression, anxiety, and ADHD, these kind of things, right? So the first question that is always there is to make diagnostics. If there's a person, they come to the clinic, they come to the psychiatry, and then the doctor there, the first thing to do is to make some diagnostics. So there is a kind of a questionnaire or checklist. They will ask the person, do you have this, do you have that? And there are symptoms. And based on the symptoms, the doctor or the psychiatrists, they will make diagnostics, okay? There is quite a well-established standard, the checklist for this purpose, but it's not enough because most of the mental diseases, there is a quite high heterogeneity. So that means if I have ASD, my ASD symptoms or my cause of ASD might really be different than another person's ASD. So within these psychiatrical populations, there is a high level heterogeneity. That makes it pretty challenging to diagnose patients. So one promising approach to make it a little bit easier to diagnostic, not easy, but easier to diagnostic is to use computational psychiatry. So how does that work? We know that we can make a button press, make a choice between the blue option and yellow option, and we can feed the model to the data. We can see the learning rate, right? We can feed the model to the data, get the parameter fits. We could also ask the patients to come into the lab and to do the same task. One particular example is in the population of I think depression. So the reason why a subset of depression patients that they are depressed, it is because they have a different understanding of reward. So they might process reward differently relative to healthy people. So then we can investigate their reward processing. So how to investigate reward, we can use the task that we have been using during the lecture, right? We can ask them to make this two-choice button press experiment and to think and to estimate how they value each of the two choice options given the feedback. And we could also, because we can fit the model, we could get the parameter estimates like the learning rates. And then using the learning rates, using the computational task and also the modeling together with the conventional checklist for diagnostics together, it will make better or much more precise diagnostic of the patients, okay? So this is one example of reward processing. And maybe there's another group of psychiatrical populations. They might have a different understanding of aversive outcomes. So maybe they are a little bit much more aversive of loss. So then maybe this is also a good approach, computational psychiatry, to understand how people overweigh or underweigh aversive outcome relative to the healthy control, okay? So computational psychiatry. This has been pretty popular recently, and this is evidence in a few examples I can show you. So one example is that there is a relatively new, not so new, there's a newly established center, so research center on the topic about computational psychiatry and aging. It is based both in Berlin, the Max Planck Institute, and in London, the University College London, the UCL here. So this is like a joint center. This is really the first center in the world, and it's currently still the only center in the world, specifically and exclusively focusing on computational psychiatry. And there are pretty amazing researchers working on this field, many levels of disorders, many levels of understanding, both computationally and neural level. So they also use different neural approaches. If you are interested in this level, this line of research, either Berlin or London is pretty good place to go to do your PhD there, okay? And another example, two examples, is that we know that who are the people that are in the front of like fighting psychiatric disorders. Who are the people? They're psychiatrists, right? Or they're clinicians, in other words. You might ask, do they have the computational training? Do they have the background? Usually no. So this is the challenge. And for like clinicians or psychiatrists, they are also aware of this popularity of computational psychiatry, but for them it's pretty challenging to have the formal training. Then the best approach is to gather them and ask them to go somewhere to have a intensive workshop, for example, 1 week or 2 weeks. There are two this kind of workshops or courses, CP course, computational psychiatry courses in the world so far, two. So one is in Zurich in Switzerland, not so far from here, 4 hours by train. And another one is in London and also in New York. It is because one of the course initiators, she was in London when she initiated this course, and then later she moved to New York. So here, that's this one, New York, London. Depends on the funding, and then they may change locations. And then this one is always in Zurich. Last year, actually, it was held online, free, and maybe this year, it's likely that they will also have it for free, I think, online. This is pretty good. And the third evidence is that there's a journal. There's even a journal now called Scientific Journal. The journal is called Computational Psychiatry. And the journal was also established around 2016, 2017. And the first issue was published in 2017. Okay, so those are the pieces of evidence to show you that computational psychiatry is getting quite popular and a lot popular over the years. And then there's even a newer piece of evidence to show you the popularity of computational psychiatry. I didn't show you here, but I can tell you. So another piece of evidence is that, you know, we do research, we need money, right? It costs money. So if we ask participants to come in the lab, we either pay by credit points or cache. And also, if we use the MRI scanner is also not free. So if I use the MRI scanner is running for 1 hour, I also need to give money to someone, because running the MRI machine costs money. Maybe the electricity, maybe also the resource. For whatever reasons, doing research is expensive, okay? So that also means we need money. And then the question is, where do we get money? So usually, if we do research, we get research money from funding agencies. So maybe this is a little bit new to you, maybe if you have never gone through the process of doing research. So if I have an idea, I want to do research, but I am limited in terms of budget. So then I will write a proposal to explain why this question is interesting and what I will do, this and that, and what is the time frame. If I have a 3-year project, I will also tell the people, first year I will do what and what, and then second year, and then the third year. Okay, so then essentially there's a full-length proposal. I will submit the proposal to a funding agency. So in Austria, there's an agency called FWF, Forschungswissenschaft something fund, I guess, FWF. So they will evaluate and they will see if my research is worth funding or not. If I'm lucky enough, then I will get the funding. Okay, so then I will just use the money for research purposes. Good. So then back to the question that I want to show, the last piece of the popularity of computational modeling. It is that the FWF equivalent in the US, so the National Institute of Health, they are a funding agency. They issue money to research projects. They have a special program recently, I think from 2 years ago. They have the highest priority to projects focusing on computational psychiatry. So you see, if the funding agency, they are recognizing already the importance and the popularity of computational psychiatry, they are even willing to give money with the highest priority to projects like this. So this is really interesting and exciting field that we are facing recently, and I believe this will be very important in the future. And if some of you are really interested to this line of research, I really encourage you to explore a little bit more. Okay. So now let's go to this small example. Well, it can be large. So here, the specific example I'm giving is about autism spectrum disorder. As I said, so ASD is one of the psychiatric disorders. It also faces the challenge of the high heterogeneity within the group. And what we want to achieve is to find out what's the possible subgroups within this high heterogeneity group, okay? So what you can see here, just focus on here. No, this is better. So here, let's say this is the autism people. And perhaps hypothetically, if we use the standard checklist to diagnose them, maybe all of them, they will be diagnosed as ASD. But we also know that there is a high level of heterogeneity. And we hope with the help of computational psychiatry, we are able to find out these subgroups, like this green, pink, red, and like blue color. So with the help, we try to find out all of the subgroups. Okay, this is the idea. And we know that if there is a group, like the ASD group, if it has a high level of heterogeneity, that basically means we need a large sample size so that we can sample all of them, right? So if, let's say, there are 10 subgroups, for example, as one example, hypothetical, if there are 10 subgroups within ASD, that means if we only recruit 10 ASD participants, it's very likely that we will not sample the entire 10 subgroups. So if we maybe have 500 ASD people, it's better. Then we might have different numbers of ASD subgroups within each of the 10 groups, okay? So essentially that means we need to have a large sample size for ASD. And we also understand that recruiting a large sample of patients group is challenging because maybe in one country, if that's small and there are not so many ASD people. So to overcome this challenge, it requires us to collaborate with each other. So to overcome this challenge, there is a program called the EU AIMS. So the EU Autism Research in Europe. And now this is already in the second funding phase. Then it changed to another name. It's called AIMS 2 trials, doesn't matter. But it is like a European level consortia to try to jointly overcome, to tackle the question of heterogeneity in ASD, okay? So all of these icons here, you see they are either universities or companies. For example, this is Karolinska Institute from Sweden, this is King's College London in the UK, and this is Max Planck, this is Heidelberg, I think. Yeah, there are many universities and centers across Europe that jointly contribute to this project. So currently, there is a longitudinal version of the project. So longitudinal, recall, maybe you have learned that from your bachelor study. So longitudinal experiments means we will test participants for at a different time. So if one person is coming into the lab today and he or she will also be scheduled to be tested half a year later, 1 year later, and then maybe 3 years later, 5 years later. So if we test the same person at different time points, then we will also be able to see the change as a function of time, right? So here, this is the baseline cohort, the first time testing of all of the people. So this is a LEAP project, so Longitudinal European Autism Project. The sample size, it is pretty impressive. For the ASD group across Europe, 321 participants are recruited. And then TD is for typical development, like the healthy control in other words. And in total, there are nearly 600 people across major European countries. So the centers for this LEAP project is like in the Netherlands, 2 universities in Germany, this is Italy in Rome, and 2 in the UK, okay? Good. So, so ASD is a neurodevelopmental psychiatric disorder that is typically characterized by 2 symptoms. So one, you might heard about that about ASD, maybe they don't understand people very well. If we show a facial stimuli to an ASD person, and then that person might not even look at the eyes, the facial cues, the social cues of that face, right? So maybe you heard about this kind of stories. So this is one of the core symptoms of ASD, that is the social communication deficits. And then there is a second core symptom of ASD, that is repetitive behavior, restricted and repetitive behavior, or RRB. What does that mean? So that means they are not, most of the time, and the ASD people, they are a little bit less flexible in changing environments. So if the environment is not changing, repetitive behavior might not be a bad thing, right? They have their habits, they are habitual to some of their rituals, so they're good, they're okay. But we also know that the world is not constant, it is always changing. And in the year of 2019, how can you imagine there's something called COVID, right? This is always changing. And can people flexibly adapt to the new situation is the challenge for everyone. But this might be particularly challenging to ASD people, to people with ASD, okay? So this is the second core symptom. So we know the core symptoms from the diagnostic criteria, and how to experimentally test these two core symptoms. So I showed you on the previous slides, like 300 participants are recruited ASD, and also nearly 250 something TD healthy participants are recruited. They are recruited for what? So they are recruited for being tested at different level. So for example, here this is the procedure from the paper. If you're interested, you can not watch, you can read. They will undergo quite a few cognitive tasks like behavior, psychological experiments that we are familiar with. They are also going into this MRI scanner for brain scans, and also this blood and saliva samples to analyze their genetics. So this is really the project that is trying to analyze ASD versus TD at multiple levels: cognitive level, behavioral level, genetic level, molecular level even. So try to understand it from all the aspects, and then to try to find the subgroups within this high heterogeneity group, right? So a lot of tasks were accomplished during these lab visits as a baseline. So here, this is all of what I said is the background. And what I'm trying to show you next is one of the specific tasks that is belonging to the cognitive test. So here, I will show you one small task trying to understand repetitive behavior in ASD. Okay. So repetitive behavior, I explained to you already, the world is always changing, and flexibly adapt to a new environment is pretty important to survive. And if some people is not flexible enough, that might be quite challenging, right? So this is the background and the logic. So maybe through my description, you might already form some idea already to test it experimentally. So I said, well, changing the environment is challenging, and how can we test behavior in the changing environment? So if I give you this question, you can just think about it. What kind of experiments can you design to answer this question, okay? With the knowledge of what we have learned so far from the TEWA. So one of the experiment you can think about is this two-choice task, but with a reversal. So in the example or the exam we had during the first session, I showed you the 80-20 example. So one of the choice options is always associated with 80% reward probability. The other one is the opposite, 20. So what if the 80 and 20, they are changing? Can this change be recognized and also be flexibly adapted to in ASD relative to TD to control? Okay, so this is the question. So essentially, this is a simple reversal learning task. Then we can test the behavioral difference between ASD and TD. We can also use computational modeling, because here this is like choice, outcome, choice, outcome, choice, outcome, same, right? Same as what we have learned. We could feed computational models, and then we can compare the parameters and also how the parameters can be associated with the symptoms. This is the picture. Okay, and the task, I don't even have to explain, I guess. There are two choice options. You make a choice and you see the feedback. This is not monetary, so this is like positive or negative smiley faces. Right here, I can skip. So bigger picture is like the reversal learning task is really a tool to investigate flexible choice behavior. If the flexible choice behavior is not successful, then it can be defined as repetitive and restricted choice behavior. This corresponds to one of the core symptoms in ASD. Okay, you see the connection? So how you do a research, yep. Good. And then this is task structure, and there are two choice options. We can use the same example as the lecture. We can say, well, there's one blue option, there's one yellow option. Let's say the yellow option in the beginning is a good option, and the blue option is bad. So there are 80 trials in total. The first 40 or the first half, the yellow is better. And then in the middle, the yellow becomes a worse option, and then the blue one becomes a better option. So there's a reversal. So there is only one time reversal, only once. The reversal happens only once. This is the current task. You can also think about some more complex task structures. So maybe out of the 80 trials, there is not only one time of reversal. You can also think about the reversal happens multiple times. Maybe that's another story, but it's possible when you are designing tasks, okay? For simplicity, this task only used reversal, one-time reversal in the middle, right in the middle. Good. So here they are. Yeah, you know the task already. So maybe explain a little bit. So we know that if we are experimenters, so we know that the yellow one is a good one. So if the yellow one is giving a outcome, a reward, a positive outcome, then this observation is corresponding to the reward probability, right? The good option will generate much often a positive reward. This is good. So this is the common outcome. This information or this signal has to be learned from the perspective of participants. And we also know that this is a probabilistic nature. The good option, the better option, occasionally also produces a negative feedback, 20% of time, for example. So here in this case, in the red circle, as an experimenter, we know that this is a rare outcome. So even though yellow is a good option, it also occasionally or rarely produces a negative feedback. And we know that this is not a signal. This is a noise. This is due to randomness. This is due to the probabilistic nature. It is a rare outcome. And this one doesn't give any information. This is not informative to be learned. So this is a noise. This has to be ignored, okay? And same here, green and red. Good. So now think about it. Think about something like this. So after the reversal, then what is this? Previously, if the yellow one is the better one, then if that produces good or positive outcome, that is information, that is signal. Here, this is noise, this is due to randomness. But after the reversal, this now becomes signal. So the signal and noise, they flipped. The role is changing. And from the perspective of participants, they have to pick up this information as soon as possible. So they have to realize that the previously rare outcome is not noise anymore. They now currently become the informative signal. So they have to learn this change. And then this is also the point to analyze the difference between ASD and TD, to see if they, the ASD participants, if they still insist choosing the yellow option, because they might think, I chose yellow previously, and then I believe still that the yellow one is good, even though I see more and more often, the yellow one is giving negative feedback. I think the yellow one is still good. I still choose it. Yeah, this is like type of thinking that's kind of possible if the level of flexibility is impaired. Okay, good. I guess enough background, and we can just go a little bit faster. So there's the analysis, and we see here this is overall data, and we can skip that part. Here we can see some differences between the ASD and TD. So here plots in the red color is ASD, and in the green color is TD. There's a trajectory of making the choice. You see that after the reversal, there are some differences between ASD and TD, right? So here, for example, the red line and the green line, there is a difference to show that the ASD is not picking up the change so flexibly relative to the TD. And here the data is not so straightforward to see. And then people they analyze some behavioral index in this kind of reversal learning task. So one thing can be analyzed is the accuracy. So how often they are choosing the yellow one in the first half, and how often they are choosing the blue one in the second half. This can be analyzed in both ASD and TD, and data shown here that the TD is better than ASD. Okay, so taking one example, the green one is higher than the red. The healthy people generally, they have a better accuracy relative to the ASD. You see here the main effect. And some other things can also be analyzed. Maybe let's go here. There is a model-free strategy. So model-free means no computational model is used. So no model, just analyze it as is. Two behavioral indices can be analyzed. One is called win stay, the other one is called lose shift. So win stay means if I receive a positive outcome, how likely I repeat the same outcome. If I choose yellow, if I get a positive feedback, do I still choose yellow? If I choose, this is a win stay. So I basically repeat my previous success, right? And lose shift is the opposite. So if I choose yellow, if I lose, then I'm likely to change to the alternative to choose blue. So this is called lose shift. And as you see here, both the win stay and lose shift, there's a difference between the ASD and TD, okay? Good. And some other things can also be analyzed. This is called a preservative errors. Preservative errors means, in particular, the second half, after the reversal, how likely each person is still choosing the previously better option. If they choose so, then this can be defined as a preservative error. Okay, this is error, but if they still choose it, so then this measures preservation. Yeah. But long story short, you see here all of this analysis there is showing a difference between the ASD and TD. Good. So next, we know that this is a choice task, decision-making task. People make a choice and then they see the feedback. So what we can do, we can fit a computational model. Then here I go back to this later. So then this basically goes back to our lectures. What do we know? We know the choice and outcome. We know what they choose, left or right, and we know what they get, positive or negative. We can measure the accuracy, and we want to know the computational process. And this goes back to our modeling procedure. So in this particular case, we proposed 3 models, also together with the simple risk Wagner. That is a baseline, so this is not shown here. But essentially, you see here all of the models, all of the 3 candidate models, they are the variants of risk Wagner. Here, the one in the middle is part of the program project. So there is a learning rate for positive outcome. There is a separate learning rate for the negative outcome, so RP model. This one we also covered during the lecture. So this is called the Counterfactual Updates. I update the value not only for the chosen option, I also update the value for the unchosen option with the assumption that the unchosen one, it is the counterfactual value update, okay? And then there's a third one, we've never seen this in the lecture and I will skip it. The name is called experience weighted attraction, it's called EWA. The simple idea is that not only the value is updated on the trial by trial base, there's something called a experience weight that is also updated. So if I learn something, if I have a constant success history, choice history, then my experience might be successful, right? If I lose and win equally likely, then my experience might be a little bit different. And after the reversal, the previous experience will affect the preservation, the preservative error. And then this is one of the models that is used pretty often in reversal learnings. Okay. Counterfactual updates, RP model and EWA, 3 candidate models. So what we can do is the model fitting. So here, I can skip this part. This part maybe, well, okay. I guess we have to spend some time here. We have a decision-making task, and we have to know that what are the appropriate models corresponding to each task. So if we have a learning task in the same structure, the same as choice, feedback, we can use reversal learning. And there is something else, some other models that we never covered in the lecture, but it's worth looking at. Some Bayesian learning model, risk aversion model, this one for delay discounting, and then something else. Okay, depends on the task, depends on the literature. So the best place to look at all of the models is to look at the original paper, to look at which is the first paper that is published in the literature using this model. And then there, the explanation is usually pretty detailed, okay? All right. So now let's talk about the workflow or the procedures. So if you are trying to use or implement computational modeling in your own research, what you should consider? What steps do you want to have, right? What steps are there? The first thing I want to talk about here, it is called a prior predictive check. So this is a little bit new because we didn't talk about prior predictive check during the lecture. We talked about something called posterior predictive check. You will see that, and that is easy to explain. So the prior predictive check, even though I didn't mention that during the lecture, but it's getting more and more important in computational model practices. So what is prior predictive check? We fit models. We fit Bayesian models. If we fit Bayesian models, we have to specify prior. And how do we specify the prior? This seems arbitrary, right? A lot of the people who are criticizing the Bayesian methods is that Bayesian method subjective because you can choose whatever prior you like. Is that true? I would argue that this is not true because there is a kind of a criteria for you to choose the range of priors. So maybe if your prior is, if you have a parameter, the parameter is in between -1 and 1. Maybe let's say if there's a learning rate, the learning rate is between 0 and 1. If the prior is very strong around maybe 0.1 or 0.05, is that a good prior? So maybe not. And if this is not a good prior, then we could give a low density to this a specific value of the prior, and then give the density of the prior at some other levels, okay? This is maybe too abstract. I try to explain that a little bit. Say we have a model, the Risk-Wagner choice model. We could use the model as a simulation tool. So if we predetermine a parameter, we can ask the model to generate fake data for us, right? So like the regression model, if we know the slope, I can draw something, X and Y. If we know the slope, if we also know the intercept, we can just generate data according to this model. And the data is just along this line, right? This is called data simulation. Good. We could also use the same procedure to generate choices using the Risk-Wagner model. And then this is shown, for example, on the x-axis. And the summary statistics can be how often each participant is choosing the correct response. And we know that a priori, maybe the choice accuracy cannot be 0, cannot be 1, right? So for example, if we have two choice options, one square, one circle, we assume that one is better, the other one is not. Let's assume I don't really learn anything. I just close my eyes and randomly make a choice. How often I will choose the correct answer correctly? 50%, right? Chance level. So if I just close my eyes and I make a random choice, then I will have a chance level performance. So this is the assumption. If we have a prior that generates a 100% accuracy, do you believe that? You don't, because this is so away from chance level. And if you have another prior that generates 0 accuracy, that's also not possible, because how can a parameter, how can a model generate none of the choices correct? This is not possible. So in this sense, you could rule out the parameters that give you a 0% accuracy or a 100% accuracy, okay? So maybe, for instance, here this is 90. No, sorry, this is 10. Here this is 90. You can imagine that prior to data collection, prior to any knowledge about the parameter, it is not possible to get a simulated data that achieve accuracy either below 10% or above 90%. Okay. So you essentially want your simulated choice to be distributed in between these two ranges. In other words, if you have some other parameter values that generates the data either within this range or within this range, then those parameters cannot be used as the prior of the distribution, okay? So this is called the prior distribution check. A little bit difficult and you have to think about it. But the long story is that, the short story is that it is true that choosing the prior distribution is arbitrary, but it's not subjective, because there is there's a procedure called predictive check to help you rule out the unlikely priors. And then you use the informative and interesting parameter information as your prior, okay? So prior predictive check. And what I'm saying underneath is it requires some domain expertise. What is domain expertise here? The particular domain expertise in this example is that you have to know, if you close your eyes, what is the chance level? Chance level is 50%. This requires you, even though this sounds stupid, but this is the part that requires your domain expertise. Okay, domain here means psychology or decision neuroscience, decision science, decision making. You need to know the chance level. If you don't know that part, then you cannot do prior predictive check, because there is no decision threshold or criteria to help you decide which is a good prior, which is some prior that is poor. Okay, good. Are there any questions? I think I need to have a break here a bit. So stretch break. Are there any questions? No? Good. All right. Okay. So then the slides next, you will see it's quite familiar to what we have covered. So this will come a little bit easier. So we will do model fitting, and to do model fitting, we use Stan, and we prepare everything in R. We prepare the data, and then we send the data to Stan, and then Stan do the fitting, and then Stan will return the fitting results back to us in R. That's the fitting object. And with the fitting object, what you can do, so you can do plotting, you can see the posterior distribution of the parameters. You could also compare models if you have multiple models, right? So we have this. So fitting the models is basically what we have discussed during the lecture. And here I'm showing you the results of the autism experiment. So we have the TED group, we have the ASD group. Each column here, that's the age group. So children, adolescents, and adults. And children, adolescents, adults, same. And here in color, they are the different model identities. So I showed you the fictitious, this is the counterfactual update, RP is the reward punishments, and EWA is the experience weighted attraction model. Very interestingly, you see here, within the children group, the counterfactual double updating is winning. It is also the winning one in the ASD group. Similarly, in the adolescents, the reward punishment model is winning, both in the ASD group and also in the TD group, okay? And for the adults, it's the same. In the adults group, either TD or ASD, so the EWA model is always meaning. So here, how do you want to summarize? If you see a table or a graph like this, how do you summarize the results? So basically what you can say is that the winning model, the specific cognitive strategy within each age group, there's no diagnostic difference. So within children, SDTD, no difference. Always the counterfactual double updating is the winning. And within adolescents, no TD-ASD difference. And within adults, no TD-ASD difference, right? This is the observation. But across developmental stages, from children through adolescence into adults, there is a change in terms of the cognitive strategy from double updates to the RP and then eventually to the EWA. And then this trajectory is identical between ASD and TD, right? This is the observation. And now if you are the person who is analyzing the data, you have analyzed all the behavioral data as I showed you earlier, there is indeed the behavioral difference, like the accuracy, like the Vince they lose shift behavior index, there is a difference. And if we fit the model, there is no difference. The winner model is the same between ASD and TD. Then how come is that? How do you want to solve this problem? So to solve this problem, we will have to look at the parameters. So if here, let's say, for example, the adolescents, if the RP, if the reward punishment model is the winning one for adolescents, either for TD or for ASD, we can actually look at the parameters to see if there is a parameter difference between TD and ASD, okay? And then this is what we did for this comparison. So before that, I show you this posterior predictive check, and this is something we covered a lot during the lectures. So posterior predictive check in essence is to ask the model to simulate data given the posterior distribution of the parameter, and then to see if the simulated data, the pattern of the data, matches the pattern of the real data, okay? So here what I show is that the models, they are good for both TD and ASD and also across different age groups. So that basically means the model is accurate enough. It's doing a decent job in explaining the variance in the data, okay? And then there are quite a few different ways to visualize posterior predictive check. And then this one, you can read the paper from us last year. And then if we are talking about the workflow of computational modeling, there is also something else called a model recovery and a parameter recovery. I know that what I'm talking now is really confusing to you because we didn't talk about it. And I can skip it, honestly, but I want to give you the rough idea. So you can try to bear with me, okay? So what is model recovery? I will first explain the concept, and then I will show you a little bit how to do it. So the concept is, if I propose models 1, 2, 3, how I can know that they are related or not. So the question is, in psychology, if you are measuring something, you can measure either IQ, or you can measure the scores of mathematics, for example. Are they measuring the same thing or not? Maybe they're related, right? Maybe. So that basically means the two measurements, IQ and math score, they are not orthogonal. If we measure one, we could be likely to know the other, okay? But sometimes we want to measure different things. We want to make measures that are not related so that they're distinctive. Here in the computational modeling, we would also want to propose models that are making distinctive predictions. So if two models are making the same if two models are making the same prediction, why do I need to have two models? One is enough. So the model recovery is trying to help us understand if models are related or not. We do not want to have related models. We want all of our models making distinctive predictions, okay? This is the aim. So how to do this practically? Suppose we have models 1, 2, and 3. We know that we could ask the models to generate fake data. We could ask model 1 to generate fake data 1, and model 2 to generate fake data 2, and 3 as well. And then we do model fitting. As long as we have the data, we can fit the model to the data. So we can fit each of the models, 1, 2, 3, to the data that was generated from model 1, okay? So let me repeat. I use model 1 to generate a data set, D1, and I feed model 1, 2, and 3 to data 1. And then I can do model comparison. Ideally, you would imagine that model 1 will be the winning model relative to model 2 and model 3. Why is that? Because model 1 is the true process that is used to generate data. And if you do model comparison, how come model 2 is winning against model 1 and model 3, right? So this is the idea. And we want to have model 1 to be the winning one if we know the data is generated from model 1. So we repeat the procedure, and then we will see if that is indeed the case. And essentially, what you could visualize is that you will have a 3x3 matrix. So here, let's say CU is M1. I use CU to generate a data set called D1, and I fit the 3 models to the data D1, and I could get the model comparison criteria, or model comparison information criteria, for instance. As I said, if I know the data is generated from model 1, then through model comparison, M1 will also be the winning one. So then this is the diagonal. We want the models, they are able to recover themselves. So this is the idea, okay? Model recovery. So questions here regarding model comparison, model recovery? Okay, no. So if no more questions, let's continue. We could also ask these recovery questions to parameters. Then it is called parameter recovery. Model recovery, it answers questions, let's say, if we could isolate each models. If we have 3 models, we want to make sure that the 3 models are making distinctive predictions. They are not related. This is across models. And within each model, there are parameters. We want to do the same thing. So if there are 6 parameters, for instance, we do not want our 6 parameters to be related, because if 2 parameters are related, again, why do I need 2 parameters? I need one of them is enough, right? We want that all of the parameters, they make distinctive contributions. So this is called parameter recovery. So in essence, we use a set of parameters for data generation, and we feed the model to the data, and then we get the posterior parameters of the fake data. Then we compare if the estimated parameter, they resemble the true parameter. Okay, maybe a little bit confusing. Let me show you one example. So here, let's just focus on, well, maybe I just tell you some, I will use one other example. That's easier to understand. Okay. Say if I have a regression model, I have y equals 2 plus 5x. Okay, good. With some noise, for example. So then the data will, here's 2. So the data will be something like this. Okay, good. Those are the data like simulated from this line. Because we have the simulated data, those are data points. For a model fitting, the model fitting doesn't care if it is true data or fake data. So we can fit a regression line. We can fit a regression line according to those data points. And if the fitted line is like this, then if the fitted line is, for example, y equals 1.9 plus 5.1 times x, okay? If the fitted regression line has an intercept of 1.9 and has a slope of 1.9 intercept and 5.1 slope, if the fitted results is like this, then we can say those are successful parameter recoveries because we know the ground truth 2 and 5 correspondingly. We use the 2 and 5 to generate fake data, and we fit a line, and then we see if we can recover the intercept and the slope. This is okay, this is good, right? The 1.9 is basically 2 and 5.1 is basically 5. This is a good parameter recovery. In another example, so say if we have the red line there and it generates some dots, for some reason, if I fit a line, it is like this, then this is horrible. This is not a good parameter recovery, okay? So you basically want to have the parameters to be able to recover themselves. This is for parameter recovery, same idea. So the model recovery is the model fitting, they are able to recover themselves. But here for parameters, the parameters are able to recover themselves. To recover basically means to find themselves, to identify, to locate themselves. Good. And to visualize that, usually you can see, well, this line, the vertical line is the truth, is the 5, for example, and then the distribution is the fitted posterior. So ideally, if the truth is in the middle of the distribution, everything's okay, okay? Great. So now let's go back to this autism example. So I told you that for model comparison, within each age group, there is no diagnostic difference. So within children, the winning model is the same across TD-SD. Within adolescents, the winning model is the same across TD-SD, and the adults the same. But there is indeed a behavior difference. So we have to wonder where the difference is. So the difference lies in the difference. The behavior difference lies in the difference in parameter estimation. So I could use one example to illustrate. Say within the Turing group, the winning model is the counterfactual update that updates both the chosen option and also the unchosen option. So what I show you here is the learning rates. The learning rates is the same as what we have seen already from the lecture. So you see the learning rates of the ASD is higher than the learning rate of the TD, okay? What we can see here, there's a significant learning rate of TD is smaller than the learning rates of ASD. So ASD people in this experiment, at least, they have a higher learning rate. So now think about it. Does that mean it's bad to have a higher learning rate? Or how to interpret these results? So if I show you the behavioral results, TD usually they behave worse than ASD in terms of accuracy, in terms of win-stay-lose shift, in terms of preservative error. That is the fact that we know already from behavioral analysis. We fit the model, and then now the additional piece of evidence is ASD has higher or larger learning rates relative to TD. So how do you want to reconcile the results? How do you piece them together to each other? To achieve this goal, we have to understand what is the optimal learning rate here. So this goes back to the question from the exam. In this task, what is the optimal learning rate? So we can compare if the learning rate of the TD is closer to the optimal learning rate or not. and also the ASD learning rate, if that is closer or away from the optimal learning rate, okay? So in this example, if you run a simulation, you will be able to find that the optimal learning rates is somewhere here. So then you can draw the conclusion. The TD is much closer to the optimal learning rates, and the ASD is a little bit more shifted away from the optimal learning rate. So if that is not an optimal learning rate, then that is responsible for the worst behavioral analysis, behavioral finding, the behavioral difference between TD and ASD, okay? So never make the mistake to say, hey, TD has larger than ASD. TD learns faster than ASD. Sorry, let me try again. So never draw the conclusion that ASD, they have larger learning rate. They learn faster than TD. Okay, good. But if they learn faster, why they have a worse performance? So never draw this conclusion. This is wrong. So you do have to know where the optimal learning rate is, and then to compare relatively whether the TD learning rate and the ASD learning rates, how high and how low they are. This is quite important, okay? And so ASD and adolescents, they have somehow a similar trend of finding, and because this is a little bit more complex, you can just read the paper if you're interested. But the idea is similar. So the TD, the parameters in adolescents and also in adults, they are much closer to the optimal parameter. And ASD, the parameters, they are a little bit away from the optimal parameters, okay? Good. And then very lastly, this will be quick. So because this is like a larger scale European-wide data collection, a lot of questionnaires are also evaluated within the participants. So something like IQ, something like repetitive restricted behavior. So there is indeed a questionnaire that can measure repetitive restricted behavior. So we could also measure if the parameters are associated or correlated with the questionnaire data. So there are some interesting findings. You can take a look afterwards. All right. And so very lastly, and this is something that we also didn't talk about during the lecture, but I guess it's quite straightforward. So we have seen this kind of diagram quite often, quite a few times already, right? So we know we start from here, the data, and we have a model. We feed the model to the data using MCMC. So for example, we have a simple Riskler-Wagner model. Then we will have the trial by trial updated value. We will also have the trial by trial prediction error. How can we make use of these internal variables? They are called internal variables, if you recall. So how can we make use of the value computation? How can we use the prediction error trial by trial? So we could correlate this information with other modalities of measurement. So suppose if we have also brain data, neuroimaging, fMRI, EEG, eye tracking even, doesn't have to be brain data, just another modality of data beyond simple behavioral button press, we could correlate the prediction errors with the brain signal, for example, to see where in the brain is associated, is carrying out the prediction error calculation or computation. So where in the brain is carrying out the value updates. So you can answer this kind of questions. And then this kind of, or these types of analysis is called model-based analysis, because there is a computational modeling involved, and you derive the trial by trial computational signals, and you correlate that with other modalities of data. So to analyze this way using the model information is called model-based analysis. And among all of the types of model-based analysis, model-based fMRI is the most popular one, okay? Good. And then there's a step of doing this model-based analysis, but I don't have to cover that if you follow what I said. All right, good. So now let's take a look at here. I will go a little bit slower. This is essentially the workflow that I'm trying to convince you to follow whenever you are doing computational analysis using computational modeling. Doesn't have to be under the Bayesian framework. You can also use maximum likelihood parameter estimation, doesn't matter. So this workflow applies to both Bayesian or non-Bayesian, it's okay. So what do we do if we want to analyze our data using computational model? So we first have to have the data, right? So here we measure some data on experimental task, and we do a cleanup. Cleanup here means if there are missing trials, if the participants didn't give the button price in time, this is missing. There is also the missing removal in the programming project. So this is called data cleaning. So after the data cleaning, we could also see if there are outliers. So what is outlier? If there are two buttons, if there are two choices, blue and yellow, if for some reason one participant is always choosing blue, that somehow means the participant was not paying enough attention to the task. Basically, always press the same button or making the same choice. In other words, you can say this participant was not attentive to the task. That might be a good reason to remove this person. Okay. So if there is a participant whose choice accuracy is like 30%, do you remove it? Do you remove him or her? Usually don't remove it from the beginning. So maybe this is just a difficult task for that participant. That doesn't mean the person was not learning anything. The person was trying, maybe just didn't perform well, but this doesn't justify a data removal, okay? Always pressing the same button or always choosing the same option, this might be a valid consideration to remove the participants. Yeah, anyway, this is called non-compliant behavior. Maybe considering removing some of the participants given this reason. And then after that, we do a model-free analysis of the data. For instance, calculate the choice accuracy, the win, stay, lose, shift strategy I showed to you. So those are model-free analysis, analyzing the data without a computational model, model-free analysis. And then after that, we feed the model to the data. Suppose we have model 1, 2, 3, and then we feed model to the data. And there are additional steps here, so which I mentioned to you. One is called parameter recovery to find out if the parameters are related or not. We do not want to have related or correlated parameters. We want our parameters to make independent contributions. We also do not want our models to be related. If two models are making the same prediction, why do I need two? I need one is enough. So we want our models to make distinctive predictions. And then to find out this distinctive prediction and independent parameter, what we do parameter recovery and model recovery correspondingly. So then if this is done, if we are confident that our models are making distinctive predictions, our parameters are making independent contributions, we are confident. If we are confident enough, then we can really go forward. So we feed the model to the data 1, 2, 3, using model comparison, information criteria, balancing goodness of fit and model complexity to avoid overfit. So this is using the information criteria, right? Then we select the best one, for instance, M2. And then back to the exam question. The best one doesn't mean it provides the best goodness of fit. It provides the best out of sample predictive accuracy to avoid model fitting. Good. And after the model fitting, we could also have the parameter estimates. We use this information to generate fake data and then to see if the fake data, the pattern of the fake data follows the pattern of the real data. And then this process or this procedure is called the posterior predictive check. Okay, and then this concludes the workflow. The prior predictive should be somewhere, I think. It should be here, I guess. Yeah. And then this is the entire workflow that I'm really trying to convince you to follow. might be that some of them you are missing. That is okay, because for instance, if in my paper, I showed you already that the counterfactual update model and the reward punishment model, they can be recovered already. I showed you already. Then maybe you don't want to do it. You can just say, well, blah, blah, these researchers in 2020, they did it. They show it's okay. So I follow them, I trust them. This is okay, okay? But if you have an entirely new model in your research, it is really recommended to start with this kind of recovery analysis to show you that your model is a valid one, because there is nothing you can rely on. Good. And then very lastly, I think this is not so interesting. This is basically to show you some of the functions I used. Maybe I briefly show you. I have a raw data, and then I prepare my data to remove missings, to also remove some non-compliant behavior I mentioned. And then I analyze the behavior. For example, the accuracy, for example, the Venn state load shift, okay, model-free analysis. And then I want to fit model to the data. For instance, I have 3 models, model 1, 2, 3, .stem, they are stem files, and then fit. So there is a main function, say, okay, I want to fit this model D, here is the data model according to this. And I also want to tell my function to say, hey, I want to fit the ASD patients. A is adolescents or adults, I think. I want to fit the model, okay? And after the fitting, I also want to do some diagnostics. So recall from 2 weeks ago, if the MC chains, they converge or not, okay? This is model diagnostics. If they are fine, then I go forward. If there are some diagnostic problems within the model fitting, I have to repeat to see if the models are optimized. I didn't talk about here today, but we covered that earlier. There is the model optimization part to make sure that everything can be run properly, okay? If everything is fine, then we do model comparison. So here is a function to tell me which model is the best in terms of best out of sample predictive accuracy. And then here there's the posterior predictive check to find out if the fake data, the simulated data using the posterior could resemble the pattern of the real data, okay, PPC. And then here there's also the recovery part. This is kind of a separate function. And then I want to save the winning model, the object, as an external file so that I can reuse it. I do not have to fit it one more time. I can load it and then I can do further analysis. I make some plots, write paper. Good. And then yes, to show something like if parameters are correlated or not. Eventually, we do not want our parameters to be correlated. Good. So summary. Computational modeling, the idea is never new, so don't let it fear you. And we are trying to employ a easy to follow. I hope that the workflow I was delivering is easy to follow. And I hope that I convinced you this is really a doable and manageable workflow in your own research practice. And I guess if you are familiar with all of the workflows, with practice, and with all of the exercise, you are basically fluent in speaking R, in speaking STEM as you speak a foreign language. You are fluent. So this comes with practice. You will really become fluent. So what is the biggest challenge at that stage? The biggest challenge after you are fluent is basically to understand where the model comes from. So it's like, for instance, if you learn Spanish, you can speak Spanish very fluently, but perhaps the biggest challenge is to understand or to learn the Spanish history and also the history in South America. The culture part is challenging. And here in learning STEM and learning cognitive modeling, the challenging part is that you need to know the theory and you need to know where the models come from, what is the hypothesis, what is the assumption, and what psychological implication that is trying to convey, right? So here, this is the challenging part. You have to understand the computational culture, what is the history of it, and where to start or where to learn this kind of thing. some classic works is really helpful. Classic, I mean like 60s or 70s, like Pavlovian conditioning is really classic work that is motivating all of the associative learning models in reinforcement learning. And if you see the Nobel Prize award in 2014, there is something called a place cell and a grid cell that's trying to encode memory. And this idea goes back to Tolman, and he proposed something called a cognitive map. So everything is, you can really go back to, date back to the history to find out the classic work. And those are really important to improve your theoretical thinking, okay? If you don't do science, maybe you read it for fun, but if you want to stay in academia, if you want to do PhD afterwards, knowing some of the theoretical work is really making a huge difference. Good. And then next, learn to seek external help. So I can tell you later. So the STEM model is not easy to write, and we are a few years ago, me and two others, we wrote a package that basically tried to translate a lot of the popular models into the STEM language already. You can just use it. That's pretty good. And also learn in pairs, practice makes perfect. This is what we've been doing, right? You've gone through the Zoom exercise in breakout rooms, and also your programming project. I know that some of you are working in pairs. This is really great and appreciated. And I guess you will just do great in terms of using computational modeling in your research. So basically you can do it. And in particular to these reinforcement learning models, if you want to know a little bit more, so where you should start, there are a few papers. So this is from me and my colleagues. And this is another paper that describes some simple rules for computational models, also some steps on the workflows. You will see that they have a pretty large extent of overlap to what I have shown you now. And also this one is like in particular to social cognition. And then there's another one to say the importance of posterior predictive check and the model recovery, etc. So those are tutorial papers to basically know how. And perhaps you're interested in some empirical work to see how computational modeling can be helpful in answering research questions in the field of learning, decision-making, psychology. So those are a few papers, and this one is from myself, and then also from others, of course. And there are a few books and to help you, let's find a word, navigate through the process of Bayesian thinking, computational modeling. This one is pretty recommended. A student's guide is really easy to follow. And then this one is also very good, a little bit difficult, but very helpful information there in the book. And I think I mentioned him earlier in the first lecture, and he has a YouTube channel as well. You can also watch his lectures on statistical rethinking. And the third one is pretty difficult, honestly. So maybe at a later point, if you finish the first two books, if you want to go further, you can read the third. So the autism work that I showed you currently is from this paper. So me and my collaborator Daisy, and we are the co-first authors of the work, and really thankful to them, and also my previous supervisors and collaborators. That's it.